A ghost ship that had been missing for years suddenly washed up on the beach. When people went inside, what they saw terrified them. On a cruise ship, people are dancing and having a good time on one of the decks. Stewards are serving drinks to guests, and a beautiful singer is performing a love song. A teenage girl sits at a table, playing with a letter puzzle. She arranges the letters to spell out, "I am so bored." A little later, the ship's captain approaches her and invites her to dance. Nearby, a man suddenly appears and pulls a lever. A steel cable, stretched around the deck, whips across the space at incredible speed, cutting through everything in its path. For a brief moment, everyone freezes, then bodies literally split in two. In the middle of this chaos stands the girl, held tightly by the captain. She looks over at the man who pulled the lever and sees part of his head fall to the floor. The dead silence of the ship is shattered by the girl's piercing scream. Years later, a rescue crew is towing a floating oil barge. The barge has a serious breach in its hull and is rapidly filling with water. The tugboat captain orders his crew to detach the barge, fearing it will sink their ship. But one woman decides otherwise. She suits up and goes down into the hold to patch the breach. Two other guys follow her to help. They manage to save the barge and bring it to port. Later, they're sitting in a bar, celebrating their good payday and toasting to the sea. Suddenly, a stranger approaches them. He introduces himself as Jack Ferriman and asks to speak privately with the captain. But the captain has no secrets from his crew, so Jack shares his story with everyone. He says he's a weather patrol pilot who monitors the conditions in the bay. A month ago, while flying over the Bering Strait, he spotted a liner. He circled it 3 times and tried to make radio contact, but got no response. Jack says he reported it to the Coast Guard, but since it's in international waters, they just made a note of it. He had forgotten about the ship until 2 days ago when he saw it again. The crew becomes intrigued, and the captain asks what Jack wants in return. Jack replies that he wants 20% of whatever they find on board. The captain asks for a moment to discuss it with the crew. After a brief discussion, they decide to go after the mysterious ship. They offer Jack 10%, and though he hesitates, he agrees, but only if he can go with them. The rescue ship heads out to find the missing vessel, but suddenly, the captain's assistant spots it on the radar, only for it to disappear in an instant. They call the captain to the bridge, and together they watch the readings as the liner flickers in and out of view, almost as if it's taunting them. They turn on the forward searchlight and try to make contact, but there's no response. Out of nowhere, a massive ship materializes right in front of them, and the tugboat crashes into it at full speed. When they check out the liner, the captain is stunned to realize it's the Antonio Grazia, a ship that vanished on September 21, 1962, without any distress signals. Even the most skeptical had hoped to find it, and now that they have, maritime law is in play. After docking, the crew disembarks onto the liner's deck, leaving Jack and Greer behind on the tugboat. As the crew starts exploring, Captain Murphy warns them to be cautious. The ship has been rusting for decades, and the floors might be unstable. They soon discover that the lifeboats are missing. As they investigate further, they hear an eerie ticking sound from a wall clock, and a letter toy on a nearby table spells out "Welcome aboard," though the crew doesn't notice it. A girl asks Murphy how many people were on board, and he replies there were around 600 passengers and 500 crew members, high society and the wealthiest people of their time. Meanwhile, Greer tries to reach the team via radio but only hears static. As the rescuers find the bridge entrance and struggle to open the door, one of the team members falls through the floor. Epps manages to pull him back up just in time. The girl then spots a little girl on the stairs who vanishes quickly, leaving Epps unsure if it was a figment of his imagination. On the bridge, they find that all navigation systems are down and the fuel tanks are empty. They also discover electronic clocks, technology that wasn't around in 1962, which means they're not the first to find the ship. Captain Murphy suggests they return to their own vessel to rest and resume towing at dawn, and the crew agrees. Back on their ship, Jack wonders what happened to the passengers. The captain recounts the story of the Mary Celeste, a brigantine found abandoned and empty 2 months after leaving port, possibly a ghost ship. After hearing this, Jack asks what their next move should be. Murphy proposes securing the liner with a cable and towing it, but Santos doubts their ship can handle it due to damage. Greer suggests anchoring the liner and making repairs before returning, but they find that all the anchors have been cut. After some discussion, they decide to focus on repairing their own ship first. Epps stands on the deck, still thinking about the little girl she saw earlier. Jack approaches, and she tells him about the teenage girl she spotted on the liner, but she admits that it was probably just her imagination. The next morning, the crew dives into the water to inspect the ship's hull. They discover a large breach that extends all the way to the ship's main structural support, likely caused by the liner running aground on rocks. They have only 3 days to repair it before the current pushes the ship into nearby cliffs. After developing a repair plan, the crew gets to work. According to maritime law, they should notify the Coast Guard about their find, and Greer is ready to send a radio message. However, Murphy forbids it. He doesn't want any uninvited guests. The crew splits up to cover different sections of the ship. Santos heads to the engine room, Dodge and Munder go to the aft cargo hold, Murphy and Greer survey the area, while Epps and Jack explore the bow. As Epps and Jack investigate, they find a room with a swimming pool. Epps notices bullet holes in the walls. Hearing a strange noise, she hurries to climb out of the pool, but as she reaches the edge, the little girl suddenly appears again. Startled, Epps slips off the ladder, and the girl vanishes. Meanwhile, Murphy finds the captain's cabin. He decides to check it out alone, leaving Greer outside the door. At the same time, Dodge and Munder reach the cargo hold, but it's completely flooded. Dodge tries to contact Epps via radio, but it still doesn't work. Jack arrives at the pool's edge and sees Epps lying at the bottom. He quickly jumps in to help her. In the captain's cabin, Murphy spots an open bottle of alcohol and a filled glass. He picks up the glass, intending to take a drink, but suddenly sees the liner's captain appear in the mirror's reflection. Startled, he drops the glass, but when he looks again, the reflection is gone. Epps tells Jack about the bullet holes in the walls, suggesting that a mass shooting might have taken place there. As they walk along the pool's edge, blood begins to pour out of the bullet holes, filling the pool, but they don't notice. Meanwhile, Greer continues his inspection. He hears music coming from nowhere and follows the sound. He finds himself in a grand ballroom, the same one where a singer performed 40 years ago. Meanwhile, Epps and Jack make their way to the laundry room, which leads to the forward cargo hold. They struggle to open a heavy, sealed door, and when they finally manage to, a flood of water gushes out, sweeping them off their feet. To their horror, the water isn't the only thing that rushes out. Bodies float out with it. Judging by their condition, these people died about a month ago. Panicked, Epps tries to contact the captain, but the radio still isn't working. She realizes they need to call the Coast Guard and get out of there. But when they try to go back through the doors they entered, they find them sealed shut. With no other choice, they wade through the water filled with corpses, searching for another way out. Elsewhere, Greer finds a photograph of a beautiful singer named Francesca. Epps and Jack finally manage to escape the water. In one of the rooms, Jack spots a car he's always wanted, but Epps insists they need to leave. Suddenly, something catches her eye, a movement. She approaches a pile of sacks and pushes them aside, only to uncover a swarm of rats. Beneath the rats, she finds bars of gold. Elated by the discovery, she tries the radio again. This time, it crackles to life, but instead of a normal response, a creepy voice calls her by her real name and tells her to go to the refrigerators. Cautiously, Epps makes her way to the kitchen and approaches the walk-in fridge. As she enters, the hanging sacks inside suddenly come to life, grabbing at her. Terrified, she bolts from the room, only to realize that it's Dodge and Munder playing a prank. Furious at the guys, she informs them about the bodies they found and the gold bars. The crew gathers in a room where they pry open the crates, revealing that each is filled with gold bars. The amount of gold they've found is staggering, potentially worth $200 to $300 million. The crew is ecstatic. However, the bars have no serial numbers, suggesting they might be stolen, which could be the key to understanding what happened to the ship. The fresh bodies are also a concern. How they ended up here is a mystery. Greer mentions hearing a woman singing, as if she was calling out to him, but the others laugh it off, not taking him seriously. Unwilling to stay on the ship any longer, they decide to take the gold and leave the liner behind. They load the gold onto the tugboat and prepare to set sail. Santos packs up his tools after finishing the engine repairs. As he works, a valve on a nearby gas cylinder suddenly turns by itself. The countdown to departure is nearly complete. Meanwhile, the ghostly girl appears on the liner, seeing that the tugboat is about to start its engines. She yells for them to stop, and Epps sees and hears her, but it's too late to stop Santos. The girl vanishes abruptly. Seconds later, the tugboat explodes and sinks. Epps dives into the water and manages to save Greer, while Jack rescues Munder, but Santos is killed in the blast. Back on the liner, the crew is in shock, trying to process what just happened. They turn on Jack, blaming him for the disaster, but Epps steps in to break up the fight. Meanwhile, Murphy isolates himself, consumed with guilt over Santos's death. Epps begins to formulate a new plan to save them. They need to repair the liner, navigate around the approaching islands, and then hope they'll be found and rescued. After some heated debate about whether this plan is even possible, everyone except Greer agrees to go along with it. Overcome with anger and frustration, Greer storms off on his own. Murphy returns to the captain's cabin and grabs a bottle of alcohol. Meanwhile, Epps finds a girl named Katie in the passenger logs. It's her that he keeps seeing. Meanwhile, Dodge and Mander discover some unopened cans in the kitchen. Even though part of the passengers were poisoned, the cans are sealed and should be safe. After opening a can of beans, one of the guys carefully tastes it. It turns out to be very tasty, so the other guy joins him in the meal. While everyone is occupied with their own tasks, Epps sets out to find Katie. Suddenly, all the doors in the hallway start closing by themselves, except for one that is invitingly ajar. Dodge and Mander, happily munching on the beans, notice after a minute that what they're eating isn't beans but maggots. The girl enters the room and realizes it's Katie's cabin. When she opens the closet, she finds the child's body hanging inside. Meanwhile, a drunken Greer watches as the dance hall magically restores itself to how it was 40 years ago, with elegantly dressed people appearing, including the beautiful Francesca. Leaning on the captain's desk, Murphy suddenly sees a half-empty bottle start moving. Looking up, he is horrified to see the ship's captain in front of him, pouring alcohol and offering it to him. In the middle of the party, Greer is approached slowly by Francesca, who invites him to dance. She lures and entices him. Realizing that this is all in his head and that cheating with a ghost doesn't count, he gives in to her temptation. Epps examines the body and takes a locket from it. Inside are 2 photographs. Suddenly, a child's voice speaks from behind. It's Katie, asking not to close the locket because the photos are of her parents, whom she hasn't seen in a long time. They moved to New York, and she was traveling to join them, but they had already died. Epps decides to give the locket to the girl and places it in her palm. However, it passes through her hand, and Epps realizes that Katie is indeed a ghost. Meanwhile, Murphy is talking with the captain, who tells him about the ship Lorelei, which was already sinking when Antonio Gratz found and rescued it. In the photos, Murphy sees the boxes of gold they had found with the crew. The ghost explains that they were on the Lorelei, and only one crew member survived. The captain hands Murphy a photo, and as Murphy takes it, his expression changes. Francesca leads Greer further and further away from the dance hall. Epps talks to Katie, who reveals that everyone on the ship is trapped and cannot leave. Once the ship has collected enough souls, it will fulfill its quota and then everyone will be sent away. But before Katie can say where, she starts seeing blood seeping through the ceiling. Terrified, she tells Epps that he doesn't want her to say anything. Katie begs Epps to escape from the ship. Suddenly, Katie screams and disappears, leaving Epps alone in the cabin. After his conversation with the captain, Murphy tries to find Epps to tell her everything. However, by the pool, he encounters the ghost of Santos, who is aggressively trying to kill him. Greer is now completely under Francesca's spell. She has discarded her dress, and Greer, losing all sense, follows her into an open door. Instead of a cabin, he finds a deep shaft and falls in while trying to embrace her. Francesca then morphs into a decaying corpse right after he falls. Epps runs through the ship's corridors searching for Murphy. Around a corner, she finds him, but he thinks she's Santos trying to kill him and attacks her with his fists. Desperately fighting back, Epps struggles, but the captain is stronger. At the last moment, Jack intervenes, knocking Murphy unconscious with the first thing he could find. Believing Murphy has gone mad, the crew locks him in the aquarium and sets out to search for Greer, but they find no trace of him. Epps admits she sees ghosts and that one of them, Katie, said they need to escape. After discussing their options, they decide to return to their original plan and repair the ship. Mander, Epps, and Dodge, in their diving gear, dive into the flooded holds to seal the breach. They manage to fix it, come back up, and set up the pumps to start removing the water. However, the current is too strong, and they will need to adjust the course with the rudder. This gives them a chance to survive. Epps decides to search for Greer again. As she navigates the ship's corridors, Katie appears once more. When Epps approaches her, she discovers the dead body of a young man who fell from a height onto iron spikes, and there's nothing that can be done for him. Dodge and Mander monitor the water extraction. Suddenly, one of the pumps stops working, and they realize it's clogged. After a game of rock paper scissors, Mander loses and dives into the water to see what's wrong. Epps examines the scene of Greer's death. Suddenly, Katie approaches her and places a hand on her shoulder, wanting to show her what happened that night. Epps is transported back to the night of September 21st. The scene around her is filled with elegantly dressed people, with Francesca singing and everyone dancing. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the chefs are adding poison to all the food and drinks. Next, Epps sees the rope on the deck snapping, slicing the dancers in half. Amid the chaos, a screaming Katie runs through the ship, which is now engulfed in terror. There's blood everywhere, with some of the crew killing everyone they can, some with knives, others with poison, and some driven into the pool and shot. 2 men grab Katie and drag her into a cabin. They did all this for the gold-filled crates, but the crew betrays the first mate and kills everyone involved in the massacre. Francesca arrives at the room with the crates and, wanting the riches for herself, kills the first mate, but her plans are thwarted when a man enters and kills her as well. The stranger brands her hand with a mark, and Epps realizes it's Jack Ferriman. She understands that he has trapped her entire crew. Back in reality, Epps rushes to Murphy, but it's too late. The aquarium, which was completely empty, is now filled with water, and Murphy is dead. A photograph of Jack falls from his hand. Epps finds Dodge and tells him that Murphy is dead and they urgently need to escape the ship. She explains that she, Dodge, and Mander are still alive not by chance. They were specifically brought here to repair the ship. At that moment, Jack enters the bridge, also with the news of Murphy's death. Leaving the guys together, Epps asks them to watch each other while she finds Mander and checks the welding. She hands Dodge a gun and leaves. Meanwhile, Mander tries to find the cause of the blockage but suddenly gets his fins caught in the gears and is pulled into them. Epps arrives at the pumps and sees that the water being pumped out is bloody. She realizes that Mander is dead. Jack is trying to escape Dodge, who wants to search for Epps. Dodge stops him, remembering Epps's instructions, and decides to do whatever it takes to stop Jack. He shoots at him, thinking he has killed him, and leaves the bridge. However, Jack comes back to life. Epps is planning explosives throughout the ship when Dodge arrives and tells her he shot Jack. Epps is skeptical, and Dodge insists that they need to escape with the goal to solve all their problems and live their dream life. But Epps is resolute. She doesn't care about any of that. Noticing Dodge's strange behavior, she realizes that it's not really Dodge. Confirming her suspicion, he removes his disguise to reveal himself as Jack. He explains that he's a soul hunter, and out of everyone present, Katie is the hardest to control. Innocent souls are difficult to manage. He has a quota for captured souls, and if he loses the ship, his superiors will be very displeased. He offers Epps a deal, her life in exchange for the ship, but she refuses. After her refusal, Jack attacks Epps, knocking the detonator device out of her hand. Epps fights back with all her strength. Just when it seems like it's all over, she manages to grab the gun. Realizing that shooting Jack is futile, she aims at the device. A loud shot, the explosives detonate, and Jack is blown to pieces. The cruise liner sinks. Epps desperately tries to escape the sinking ship, and Katie appears to show her the way to freedom. Emerging from the water, Epps sees all the freed souls rising into the sky. A few days later, a weakened Epps is found by another cruise liner. She is rescued and taken to shore. Sitting in the ambulance, she is horrified to see familiar gold crates being loaded onto a ship by men who look astonishingly like her deceased crew. Bringing up the rear of the procession is Jack. Epps starts screaming no, in terror, but the doors of the ambulance close. Would you risk going on a tour of a cruise liner that suddenly appeared out of nowhere? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.